Hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of Season 3 of the Dark Money Files, in which we shine a light into a murky world. I'm Ray Blake, and with me is my co-host, friend and business partner, Graham Barrow. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Ray.
Well, last week, Graham, we said we'd be looking this time at correspondent banking, which was prompted by developments in the Danske Bank case. So perhaps we ought to start by getting up to speed with that case first of all.
Good idea, Ray. I think we should begin with the rather sad news that Danske's former Estonia branch CEO, Ivar Rehi, has died. He'd been initially reported as missing after he left his home in Greater Tallinn in exercise clothes, but failed sadly subsequently to return. And 2 days later, he was found dead. This week, the police have confirmed that all evidence indicated this was suicide.
As I understand it, Graham, he wasn't actually a suspect in the money laundering investigation and wasn't one of the Danske bankers detained by police last year.
That's right, Ray. There's no indication he was personally involved, and I don't think his death cast doubt on that, well, at least according to the reports.
It's a sad development. What else is new on the Danske Bank front?
Well, the German authorities raided Deutsche Bank's HQ in Frankfurt.
No, Graham, we're talking about Danske Bank, not Deutsche.
I know. Deutsche Bank was raided in connection with the Danske Bank money laundering.
What was their role, Graham?
Ray, they were the correspondent bank for Danske.
Do you want to just briefly explain what that means, Graham?
I wish I could, Ray. I can explain it, but I'm not sure about briefly.
Right, okay.
So let's say at a very basic level, it means that Deutsche Bank acted as Danske Bank's bank.
And at a just slightly less basic level?
Okay, all right then. Let's say, let's say you're a bank in country A, and you've got a license that lets you take deposits and make payments in that country. And therefore you work in the currency of your country.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, you've got clients who are, let's say, importing and exporting, and they need to make and receive payments in, let's say, US dollars.
Okay, so why is that a problem?
Because you don't have a way of doing that for them, right? The US dollar is a foreign currency. It's not the currency of the country that you're based in.
Well, when I need to use dollars, I go to the bank and they sort it out for me.
And banks do exactly the same thing, Ray.
Okay, so I think I see. Let's make this a little bit more real with an example. Danske Estonia does business in euros. If its customers are making and receiving payments in euros, nobody else needs to be involved. But if some of their customers are receiving or paying US dollars, and I assume we're talking US dollars here.
Yeah, we are indeed.
Okay, then it will need its correspondent bank that's licensed in US dollars to make those transactions on its behalf.
Exactly, the US dollar correspondent bank, and in this case that's Deutsche Bank, amongst a couple of others, but this is Deutsche Bank we're talking about. And they maintain a dollar account in the name of Danske Estonia, and it pays and receives accordingly.
Okay, so on a given day, Danske Estonia customers make dollar payments of, let's say, $3 million and get dollar receipts of $2.5 million. Then Danske's account at Deutsche Bank ends the day $500,000 down.
That's exactly right. You've got it.
Okay. And that's the main principle behind correspondent banking, is it?
Well, pretty much, yeah. I mean, for the sake of today, yeah.
Fine. Okay. So what are the consequences of such an arrangement from a financial crime point of view, Graham?
Well, Ray, there's several. So let's start with knowing your customer, KYC.
Yes, I think it's quite clear that as a bank, you need to take steps to know your customers, to understand their business, and keep a close eye on their actions and transactions.
Indeed, but how does that work when your client is a bank itself and the transactions on the account are all for the customers of that bank?
Yes, of course. The transactions are not for your customer, but for your customer's customers. There's no way you're going to be able to do due diligence on all of them.
That's right, Ray, and nor do you have to.
Isn't that a bit of a loophole?
Well, it could be, and it's one of the reasons that correspondent banking should always be viewed as a higher risk activity for the bank acting as the correspondent. But the banks will only accept correspondent banking clients where they are satisfied with the KYC of the bank, the due diligence and other controls that the local bank, their client, has in place.
So they're relying on the controls in place in that bank to take care of risks they don't have full sight of themselves.
Yes, and that needs to be properly controlled and managed with regular reviews of the relationship and the client bank's activity.
Yes, I see. And how does it work with the transactions themselves, Graham? Does the correspondent bank just trust the client bank in that respect too?
Well, the correspondent bank has full sight of the payment details thanks to the SWIFT messaging system. So it's able to subject all those payments to its own payment controls, screening each payment for sanctions violations, for instance.
Okay, I see. And are we getting to the Deutsche Bank development here?
Well, yes, Ray, I think we are. As listeners will know, Danske Bank is under investigation in a number of countries over 200 billion euros of suspicious payments which moved through its Estonia branch. Deutsche Bank was one of Danske's correspondent banks while this was happening.
So at least some of that 200 billion euros will have passed through Deutsche Bank.
Yes, and that's not been disputed by Deutsche themselves. The search for information at Deutsche was undertaken by three prosecutors and nine agents from Germany's Federal Criminal Police, according to a report by Reuters.
What prompted the search, Graham?
Well, again, according to this report, the prosecutors say that Deutsche had alerted authorities to 1.1 million suspicious transactions and that a double digit number of transactions with a value of 12.5 million euros were either reported by Deutsche Bank too late or should have been blocked by Deutsche Bank from the start.
Hold on, Graham. Did you just say 1.1 million transactions?
According to the Reuters report, Ray, yes.
Okay, Graham, think about that for a second. 1.1 million suspicious transactions. How did that not become a headline all to itself?
Um, it is quite a lot.
It's more than that. Looking back at the Brun and Hjela report, it very helpfully identifies the total number of transactions through the non resident portfolio at Danske.
Which, let's be honest, would likely have been the main source of the dollars that required clearing.
Exactly. And the report says that ignoring internal transfers, which wouldn't go anywhere near the correspondent relationship, um, those transfers totaled 7.5 million.
So, bearing in mind that Deutsche wasn't the only correspondent clearing on behalf of Danske, that means that something rather more than 1 in 7 of the total volume of transactions over a 7 year period have now been reported as suspicious.
And common sense tells you that can't have happened in real time because any bank identifying 1 in 7 of its underlying correspondent transactions as suspicious would have not just shut down the relationship, but raised a huge red flag to its regulators.
Yeah, and it's not at all apparent that any of that happened.
No, and it looks a bit weird next to the following line, doesn't it? That piece about a double digit number of transactions with a value of 12.5 million euros being either reported by Deutsche Bank too late or that ought to have been blocked by Deutsche Bank from the start. I mean, I guess given the overall volume, you'd expect a certain level of mistakes, but something about that sentence really doesn't read quite right.
No, I agree. Prosecutors have specifically stated that they're looking at a suspect who worked at the bank during the period in question.
Okay,
And you know, Ray, here is the really interesting part of the story.
yes.
Prosecutors said that the period in question was 2014 to 2018.
Oh, that is interesting, isn't it?
Well, I thought you'd see it. So, do you want to tell the listeners, Ray?
Well, Deutsche Bank withdrew correspondent banking services to Danske Bank Estonia in 2015.
Exactly.
So, what could this mean, Graham?
Well, Ray, if I had to guess, and this is a guess, I'd say it might indicate following their withdrawal as correspondent in 2015, they subsequently performed a retrospective review of the transactions that they had cleared, and the reporting is based on that. But honestly, that is simply a guess, and I think we'll just need to keep an eye on this one, Ray, and see what else emerges.
Okay, then. So, let's go back to some of the other issues that you have to worry about when you offer correspondent banking, shall we?
Good idea. Where do you want to start?
Well, how about the de risking problem?
Yeah. Do you want to tell us about that?
Okay, well, let's say, Graham, that as a bank, you have a client, not a bank, but a personal or corporate client that you're not happy about having on your books. You think the financial crime risk of keeping this client is too high, and you give them notice and you close their accounts.
And that can happen, Ray.
Yes, it can. But now let's put ourselves in the shoes of that client. You can't do without a bank account. You have to go and find another bank that will take you on.
A bank maybe whose risk appetite is a bit wider,
Possibly so, Graham, and possibly a smaller or more local bank. That's been a trend in recent years.
and smaller local banks typically need correspondent banks, don't they, Ray?
Well, most banks making any international payments need them, but it's fair to say that smaller, more locally based banks are more dependent on them for international payments than a larger group would be, yes.
So I think I see where this is going. You could exit a client only to have that client then go to one of the banks you have a correspondent banking relationship with and find yourself processing their payments once again.
Yes, except now you won't necessarily hold as much information about them as you did because they're not your customer anymore.
So you think you've de-risked, but actually you might not have done.
True, but on the other side of the coin, a smaller, more local bank may be better placed to control the financial crime risks of that type of client than you were when it was your client.
And that's true. Again, you have to understand and rely on the systems and controls of that bank you're providing the correspondent banking service to for this to work.
Oh, yes.
And there's a couple of arrangements that can multiply all these risks considerably, Ray. I'm thinking particularly of downstream correspondence and payable through accounts.
Yes, good point. Do you want to pick up downstream correspondence first?
Yes. Have you ever been to Russia, Ray?
Um, no, I don't think so.
There's a reason I ask, because if
Okay.
you've ever been to Russia, and I think most people who have been to Russia will recognize this situation, you will have found it almost impossible to leave without having many, many opportunities to buy some little matrons, or as the Russians call them, matryoshka.
Ah, yes, also known as Russian dolls.
That's right, a series of little hollow figures in ever decreasing sizes that open in the middle, allowing the immediately smaller one to nestle within its bigger sister.
I think we're all familiar with the concept, Graham.
I expect so, but imagine for a moment that you weren't and you are presented with what looks like a single doll.
Okay.
Now imagine someone has tipped you off, or you've discovered that this doll opens up and that there's another one inside.
Okay, but what you may not realise is that this one opens too, that there's another inside, and so on.
Exactly, Ray.
So I can see where this is going, Graham. When you have a correspondent relationship with a bank, you're making payments on behalf of that bank's customers, your customers' customers.
Yep.
But what if one of those customers is itself a bank? Do you end up making payments for your customers' customers' customers?
Exactly, Ray. And I have to say, it is such a shame our listeners can't see in the notes how you got the apostrophes correct there. Absolutely perfectly.
Well, thanks, Graham.
Um, but that is the point, Ray. Your customers, your customers, you can oversee to an extent. But if they have downstream correspondent arrangements as well, you won't be able to maintain anything like full oversight of whose money you're moving, where, and to whom. You can just imagine that kind of nested arrangement as if it was a matryoshka set.
So it's fair to say that such arrangements are best avoided.
Very much so, Ray. Any bank offering correspondent banking services will want to be alert to any possibility of downstream nesting like that.
And they'll also be wary of clients who offer payable through accounts, right?
Oh, yes, very much so.
Shall I take this one?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, well, a payable through arrangement is where I, as a bank, give my clients a checkbook on my account at my correspondent bank.
Okay, and the upshot of that would be?
Well, if you're the correspondent bank, it looks like your client bank is making lots of payments in their own name. But actually, it's their clients who are doing it, and you can't tell who they are.
And potentially your client bank has less than perfect control over these payments too. They're effectively given their clients signing authority on the bank's own account.
That's right. And this is another arrangement best confined to the stay well away from list.
Okay, well, that's good. I think we should then, at this point, just summarise this quick guide to correspondent banking.
Good idea, Graham.
Okay, we've seen that correspondent banking is banking for banks. It gives banks the ability to allow their customers to make and receive international payments.
If you're offering correspondent banking services, there are some elevated financial crime risks you need to consider. And you will be reliant to an extent on your bank customers knowing their own customers and operating their own anti financial crime frameworks effectively.
Exactly, Ray. You'll still have visibility of who those ultimate clients are, so you can still monitor the transactions yourself, and of course, have a duty to investigate and possibly stop and report anything you don't like the look of.
And because you need to be able to do that, you'll want to be alert to any risk of downstream nested arrangements or payable through accounts that your correspondent banking clients might present.
Yes, of course, there's a lot more to correspondent banking which we can't cover off in one episode. But it does remind me of a US Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations report.
That's the committee that published the damning report into HSBC, isn't it?
It is, but that's not the one I was thinking about.
Ah, you're referring to the 2001 report on correspondent banking, aren't you?
I am. It's the one that was subtitled The Role of the US Correspondent Banking in International Money Laundering.
It's a while since I've read it, but I suspect it is still as relevant today as it was then.
Yeah, maybe we should devote, Ray, a future episode to revisiting that report and see what has changed and what hasn't.
It's a great idea, and while we're at it, maybe another episode looking at the HSBC report.
I think it would need more than one, Ray.
Well, I think you're right. But in the meantime, what should we look at next, Graham?
Well, Ray, in a couple of weeks, the Financial Action Task Force, the FATF, are meeting in Paris for the first of the 3 plenary meetings it holds every year.
And this is when they get together and discuss emerging typologies and other issues currently under discussion.
Exactly. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to talk about the mutual evaluation report and the role it
Hmm.
plays as a prelude, in fact, to doing a follow-up episode looking more holistically at country risk, EU equivalent jurisdictions and other associated indices.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dark Money Files. We hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to listen to future episodes, please subscribe through iTunes, Spotify, or your normal podcast provider. Thanks.